author of the transformative memoir, Decide Your Destiny. In this book, Kyle shares his heart and soul method to reclaim one's destiny. Besides being the author of Decide Your Destiny, Kyle is a speaker who empowers individuals to navigate the journey towards self-discovery and fulfillment. With a decade of experience in sales and marketing, Kyle brings expertise in guiding others towards fulfilling their aspirations. Welcome, Kyle. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Can I ask just a couple of questions so I can get a good feel of the audience? How many of you guys have written a book or would like to write books? Yep. Perfect. We've got a couple of people, and I'm assuming everyone is quite interested in storytelling and interested in stories. Hands up if you prefer, who prefers non-fiction? Hands up. Okay. Good. And then prefers fiction? A bit of a split. All right. I was thinking I could tailor my speech a little bit. I'll go through my presentation and then at the end we'll do some questions. You can grab some more tea, coffee and cookies and treats at the end. Where did Decide Your Destiny come from? Where did the urge for the book come from? I think for a lot of us in our life, a lot of our decisions and the big things that we do in our lives comes from where we came from, where we were raised from. I was born in South Africa, Johannesburg, and I was brought to Australia when I was 2.5, Sydney. My stepfather's family and grandparents' home. That's my grandfather on the right and my grandmother talking to someone on the left. And so I was assimilated into an Australian family, very, very fortunate, very lucky. Very sad at that time as well to leave my whole South African family behind, customs and everything that I knew. Even though I was 2.5 years old, I still knew that I was in an environment that wasn't natural and normal for me. Luckily enough, I had some beautiful people that I could be welcomed into. At the age of 14, through some tumultuous teenage years, I found myself out on the streets, nowhere to go, and in the middle of the night. And so I skipped a couple of trains. This is over in Sydney. Skipped a couple of trains, knocked on my grandparents' door in the middle of the night. They came down in their gown. My grandfather said, Diane, who's there, Diane? Who's that? And so then they opened up their doors and they welcomed me into their home. And they really became my parents. They really guided me. And, there's the great book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. For me, it was a little bit of good upbringing with grandparents and not such a great upbringing, and just comparing those two and seeing what I could learn from my grandparents. So at 14, you're kind of in the tunnel, the world seems to be against you. You've got all these emotions stirring up. And so my grandparents had to try and work out a way to bring the young man out of that environment. And my grandmother was a counsellor for 60 odd years. So, and actually interestingly enough, up until her 90s, she wasn't supposed to be seeing anybody because she no longer had a license. People's children would come to her and say, you helped my father out, you helped my mother out, through a lot of her challenges in her life. Can you please help me and my child out? That's kind of the stock that my grandparents came from. My grandmother came from Cobar, which is a country town, New South Wales. She, really had the value of, give to your community, support your community. And that came from her father. Her father pulled her up on times when she was maybe judging people, using little slang words. And, he said, that's not how we treat people. Where'd you learn that from? And she obviously, where we learn all great things sometimes at school. He quickly, showed her really how to give back. And her famous quote that she'd always tell me was that her father said to her, you've been given a lot in life, so it's your responsibility to give more back. And that was kind of how she lived her life. There were probably 3 main philosophies that I learnt along my way of being around my grandparents, and definitely through my grandmother and my grandfather going into their room in the morning. The sun would come in the window and I'd be able to just chat to them. And there was it's different with your grandparents because they're not talking to you to try and get to an objection, an outcome or sway you in a certain way. Obviously in parenthood, you really want to guide your children a lot, and quite rightly. With grandparents, they were just more listening and allowed me to try and figure out, my own sort of path. And I'd go in there in the morning, chat to them. Both my grandfather and grandmother would listen to me, and I might say, I want to cut this person out of my life. They're dragging me down, and I can't handle the trauma and all that. And so what they really taught me was how to transmute that trauma into triumph, how to turn some of those pains, some of those struggles, and flip the script. And I think that was a skill that I learned very young. A friend of mine said, people like me, you seem to do better in a chaotic environment because your immune system seems to thrive and you seem to get out there and really stand up. But then when everything is kind of mundane and calm, you seem to get a bit lackluster. So for me, it was all about how do I flip the script? How do I become heroic in my own story of my life out of this kind of despair? There's a whole chapter in Decide Your Destiny where I talk about your hero's journey, and taking the hero's journey, which is a story archetype, lots of movies and lots of books, and how can you put your life story on each one of those aspects, your trials, resurrection, those certain points of the hero's journey. And as a kid, I think we can all learn from the younger us. And in the start of my book, I talk about youth is the very first section, broken up into 7 sections. And the first section is youth, because I want us to be able to revisit our youth and learn some lessons from our youth. What were some things that we already had figured out before we had programming or indoctrination or learned from experiences? Because I think a lot of us, we live our life from, we'll have a challenging experience, we'll have a painful experience, and then we will want to protect ourselves, even subconsciously, from that experience happening again. So then we change our behavior. And you might trust, say, a business coach, and then they might do you wrong, and so then you don't trust any other business coaches or a plumber or whatever it is. So now you do all your plumbing yourself because this one plumber ripped you off, or whatever the experience is. And so as a kid, I think you're living with a lot of freedom because you are truly being you. You're being yourself forward. And there is a domestication that needs to happen. There is behaviors that you have to curb, of course. I think there's something so honest and sweet about children that can really teach us. They don't have all these thoughts in their head and restrictions. They just go, I want that, I want to grab that, or I want to have a look at that, or I want to play there. And I think that's that youthful spirit that we can all kind of bring back into our lives a little bit more. So that's where I'd love, all of us to ask, what can the younger one teach us, the younger us teach us? We're probably resilient more, we probably were daring more, those sorts of things. So what sort of things do we want to bring back into our lives? And then, my grandfather, quite interesting, I seem to surround myself with friends, and they are, one of my best friends is 85 years old, and some 60 and 40 and different ages. I seem to surround myself with more elderly people because I think being with my grandparents, that's kind of the sort of era that I understand a little bit more. He said, get on with it, no complaining, no explaining. And I think that's really embodied in me. It's not saying that you can't be empathetic. It's not saying that you can't be understanding and listen to people and care. It's just my own sort of guide where I can unravel and dive deep into the emotions of a situation or a challenge. And then it's kind of like it's like you're just going down and down into all these worries. And sometimes you just got to get on with it. No explaining, no complaining, no explaining. And the way I see that as well is sometimes with emotion, it's energy in motion. You just need to get up, go for a walk, move around. If there's this big problem, just do step 1 of the problem and then take a break and reevaluate. So there's always something you can do. And the encompassing philosophy that my upbringing taught me was, expansion into the light, not contraction into the shadows. And that's really where, you're faced many challenges in your life and you can pull back. And I did. At 18, I pulled back a lot from life in my teenage years. And I truly believe that it affected my health and some of my health journey that I'll share a little bit more. But I think we can always face things and expand into them, and we'll find solutions no matter what the problems that we face. But when we retreat and kind of, shrink away from them, then the problems end up, being bigger than us.